Hello and welcome to another screencast, this time in nutrition and hydration. Just a reminder about these presentations. The yellow text boxes are for tasks for students, the green text boxes are the note-taking sections for students, the blue text boxes differentiation tasks, and the red text boxes are teaching and learning strategies and ideas for the practitioner. So when we're thinking about nutrition and hydration, what does the syllabus require us to know? So we need to know about what makes up a balanced diet. What is an actual balanced diet? We need to know about the percentages for some of the macronutrients. Okay, so for things like carbohydrates, fats and proteins. You need to be able to be aware of the different components of nutrition and how they impact our body function, and ultimately you also need to be required to know about what we mean by the word hydration, dehydration, and ultimately the physiological impacts that they have on our performance in sport. So first and foremost, let's look at a balanced diet. Okay, so when we talk about a balanced diet in GCSE PE, we're thinking about 7 specific nutrients that we need to know about in total, okay, that come from different types of food. You can see on the right hand side the Eat Well plate, that's from the government guidelines, and they break a balanced diet down into 5 sections, but for the GCSE syllabus we need to know about 7 nutrients in particular. And ultimately within this country, within the UK, we have the guidelines which suggest that we should be eating between about 5 portions of fruit and vegetables per day. But some other countries differ with that. So France, for example, the requirement is 10 portions of fruit and vegetables per day. But ultimately, what each country do agree on is that when we eat a balanced diet, it must be the right amount of calories in accordance to how much we actually exercise, so how active we are, and it needs to come from a variety of food types as we're going to look at. So first and foremost, what I want you to do is pause the video here and go to BBC Bitesize, okay, some really good revision stuff on that website, and just watch the video on the different food types. Okay, so hopefully you've watched the video. You'll notice that the video actually specifically talks about 6 different nutrients, but for the exam, for AQA, we need to know about the 7 different nutrients. So let's look at the first one, carbohydrates. So when we think about carbohydrates, okay, we're talking about the main bulk of our balanced diet will be coming from carbohydrates. So between 55 to 60% of our recommended diet. And ultimately, when we think about carbohydrates, they are the main source of energy, okay, for all different types of exercise. And ultimately, when we consume that carbohydrate, okay, our body requires glucose, okay, that's the energy that we require for when we move, for when we exercise, and carbohydrates provides this for us. And we have 2 types of carbohydrates, which come in the form of simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. So I want you to pause your video here, and can you think of what are some of the main food examples of carbohydrates? Okay, so hopefully you've come up with a few ideas. So when we first of all look at complex carbohydrates, we're talking specifically at things like bread, rice, cereal, potatoes. Okay, they are known as complex carbohydrates. Okay, they're a little bit more long lasting, okay, and they're useful for when we exercise. The other form of carbohydrates is simple carbohydrates, and these are quick bursts of energy, and these examples include things like sweets, biscuits, honey, it might be shakes, as well as sugar. So again, pause the video here, have a think about using a sporting example. Can you explain why carbohydrates are so important to an athlete? Okay, so hopefully you come up with an example there. You could have talked about an endurance activity, okay, an invasive sport, for example. And the reason why we have carbohydrates is that's our main source of energy. It's like the fuel that we put into a car. And in order for us to keep going, to keep exercising, to keep active, we need to make sure that we've got those carbohydrates. Okay, next let's look at protein. So protein, the requirement is between 15 to 20% of our recommended diet. The main purpose of protein is to increase muscle growth, but also to repair the muscle body tissue within our body. And ultimately, it provides also a source of energy as well. So again, pause the video here. Can you think of different main food types which might be to do with protein? Ultimately, you should have come up with examples, things like fish, eggs, cheese. These are all key examples. You get different sort of beans, for example, okay, which will be examples of protein. Again, pause your video here. Why does an athlete require protein within their diet? And ultimately, the example and the answer to this is obviously we need to repair our muscle tissues, we need to increase muscle growth. Okay, the reason being because we need to rest, we need to recover so that we can train and exercise again. We're not just going to do it once, it improves and enhances recovery, and it helps us when we exercise, for example, in the gym and we lift some weights. Next one, let's move on to fats. So when we talk about fats, this in our diet, we need about 25 to 30% of fats, and that might come a little bit unusual to you, but fats aren't always a bad thing, okay? We just got to be sure we eat the right type of fats rather than the incorrect fats. So ultimately, fats can also provide more energy, as it says there, than actual carbohydrates, but only at a low intensity. So we can't burn fats at a high intensity, only a low intensity. So ultimately, it says there, fats are also a source of energy, but they also give us energy source only at a low activity, okay, low intensity. So ultimately, it says there it helps carry vitamins also in the body. Okay, so things like vitamin A, vitamin B12, vitamin C. It helps to carry to the right parts of the body. And we've got two types of fats: saturated, which are referred to as bad fats, and unsaturated, which are referred to as good fats. So again, can you think of any examples of good fats, unsaturated fats, and saturated fats? Okay, so some examples you may have come up with in terms of fats would have been things like good saturated fats will include things like olive oil, avocado within portions, within the recommended portions, almonds, for example, so nuts. Okay, as long as we eat this all in moderation. Saturated fats will be things that are deep fried, okay, or processed, things like biscuits, donuts, and so on. Okay, so we've got to be careful we eat the right type of fats. When we talk about vitamins and minerals next, okay, well, vitamins and minerals obviously can be found in things like fruits and vegetables, okay, and ultimately the reason why we consume this is it helps the maintenance of our body system and just our overall general health. Okay, so when we talk about vitamins, we talk about organic substances, okay, and minerals will be inorganic substances, okay, but all will assist with the body functions within our body. So ultimately, can you think of any minerals, okay, that are required to help us with our body functions? Okay, so some examples you could have come up with in terms of minerals, you could have been thinking about iron, for example, and that, for example, prevents anemia, okay, and also helps with the formation of hemoglobin in the red blood cells. Calcium is another good example in terms of improving our bone density, improving the quality of our teeth and the maintenance of our teeth, okay, and you'll be able to find things of calcium in things like milk, cheese, and yogurts. Let's move on to fiber next. So fiber, there's two types, okay, what we look at within this food category. We look at soluble fiber, okay, this helps reduce cholesterol. So we find that in things like oats, barley, fruit, root vegetables, and so on, so carrots and so on, okay, and insoluble fats, okay, which keep and maintain our bowel healthy, okay, they help with the digestive system, and these are things like wholemeal cereals, wholemeal bread, okay, so brown bread, for example, shreddies is a good example, okay, most, fruit and fiber, lots of different fiber types you can find there to help with the digestive system. Move on to water next. So water makes up more than half of our body weight, okay, within the human body, and ultimately it keeps our our maintenance of body functions healthy and active, okay, when we are hydrated. Also helps with reaction time. It helps with the lubrication and the maintenance of our ensuring that we have the correct body temperature. And ultimately, pause the video here. Can you think of factors which might influence the amount of water we consume? So different factors we may have come up with here would be things like, for example, the temperature outside. Okay, so when we're in a hot climate, when we're playing sport in a stuffy, difficult area, high altitude, for example, we might need to keep ourselves a little bit more hydrated, for example. Okay, let's look at the next word in terms of dehydration. So when we think about dehydration, we're talking about an excessive loss of body water, okay, which interrupts the function within our body. We need to keep ourselves rehydrated. And by rehydrating, that means we consume water, okay, to restore that hydration. And ultimately, the term hydration, as it says there, is having enough water to enable our body to function properly, such as obviously things like our body temperature. Have a think about this question here. So how does being dehydrated impact on sporting performance? Okay, so when we think about the impacts here of being dehydrated, we think about the fact that we're not able to concentrate properly. We'll make poor decisions or bad decisions. Our muscles will fatigue, they'll cramp, they'll seize up, they'll tense. Okay, all of this will have a big impact in terms of our sporting performance. So, other examples in regards to the impacts of dehydration, you could have talked about the blood thickens. Okay, so we have blood viscosity. Okay, this slows the flow of blood within our body. That has an impact, doesn't it? If we can't get that oxygen to the working muscles, then they're obviously going to cramp. Okay, we're not going to be able to move as quickly or as for a long period of time. You can see in the picture there the tennis player suffering from dehydration in terms of maybe the temperature outside, but also not being able to get enough liquids on board maybe during the tennis match. We also have an increase in heart rate. Our increase in heart rate comes from the fact that our blood viscosity is higher, isn't it? Yeah. So our heart's got to work harder, and ultimately that's going to increase the demands in regards to the heart rate. Our body's also going to overheat. This has a big impact in terms of the fact that our reaction time increases. Okay, so we actually react slower. And as I said before, we get muscle fatigue, we get cramps, okay, which is going to cause a disadvantage in terms of us being able to move around the court or around a pitch easily. So have a think about what do we say for this question here. So how does hydration improve sporting performance? Okay, so if we're hydrated in terms of sporting performance, we're going to be able to think clearer, we're going to be able to last longer in terms of our performance, okay, our reaction time is going to be better. All of our performance attributes in terms of skills, fitness components, we're all going to be performing to our peak ultimately, okay, because we are hydrated. Our body's functioning perfectly, correctly, because we have that hydration. So water is really important to intake, whether it be before the game, whether it be during an activity, and even after activity, rehydrating, so we pick up some of that some of that water that we may have dispersed from sweat. And finally, for the teachers, in terms of teaching and learning strategies, a few examples here that you could talk about for this specific topic. So get your students to maybe bring in some different food types, okay, packaging, okay, where they can look at they can study some of the food labels, and you can maybe do an experiment or an investigation in regards to some of the food types. You might also want to think about keeping or getting the students to keep a diet diary, so whereby they write down what they've eaten during the course of the week, and then you can sort of categorize what some of those items might fall into, whether it's fats, proteins, carbohydrates, and so on. So they can start to discuss and compare the results, okay, using different sort of data charts. So you could be using bar charts, you could be using pie charts, and so on. And also there's lots and lots of questions in terms of exam practice that you might want to go through with your students as well. Okay, best of luck, folks.